Yep. I think we're here at a pivotal point in human history. And I think we're part of a movement that most of us will never meet each other, but we're all connecting.
Yeah.
The science backs all this up. Global consciousness, there's absolutely a global consciousness. We're
It's
all
the
connected.
non-local aspect of reality,
Yeah.
right? There's the non-linear and the non-local. Namaste and in Lak'ech, and welcome to this episode of One World in a New World. I am your host, Zen Benefiel, and we have a very dynamic guest this week in William Douglas. He's the author of The Gospel of Science recently, which is a phenomenal book. He's also the author of The Complete Idiot's Guide to Tai Chi and Qigong. He and his wife founded the International Qigong and Tai Chi Day. And so we're going to have a really interesting apocalyptic chat with William. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. William, it is so great to have you here today. Thank you for being here with us. And I'm really looking forward to diving into this apocalyptic chat we're going to have.
Me too. Yeah, thanks so much. I've been really looking forward to this. I love the work that you're doing.
Oh, cool. And me too. I love what you're doing too. My wife and I had some really cool discussions about your book. Now, not traditionally, always we dive into the other side of life. The conversations we're bereft of having, and that those are the ones that happen internally and how we figure out the connection that we have with life, the world, our relationships, and ourselves. And most of that we don't have the opportunity to talk to another about because we're seen as being weird or insane or a bit crazy or self-absorbed, depending. However, the need for those conversations is present now. So we're having them. So, William, thanks for diving in with me. So, in that, how did you first, because you've got this really deep understanding of life because of the discipline that you've practiced. How did you first get in touch with the possibility that there is this greater connection with life?
Well, it's such a long story. I get into it all in the Gospel of Science, which is second edition, by the way, and it's just became available on Audible, so Amazon Audible. To kind of put a whole bunch into a small nugget here, the first experience that I ever had was when I was 6 years old, and it was as a child. Ever since I was a child, I always remembered it. And I thought of it as an angelic experience. It's like I had this experience and it looked like an angel.
Hmm.
And uh, anyway, what happened was I realized now what was happening was it was my ethereal body. I didn't realize it at the time. And for years, I always just thought of it as, just physical. But when we were having our conversation earlier before we went on camera, you had mentioned, an ethereal experience and looking at your physical self from that perspective. And I
Hmm.
know that now that if I would have looked at myself, I would have had the same experience. I would have seen my body laying there. Because I remember what happened was the angel, it beckoned me out of bed. And I didn't want to go. I was sleeping. I was like 6 years old. I was sleeping with my mother and my dog, and
Hmm.
I remember when it started kind of pulling me out of the bed, I started reaching for my mother and my dog, and my hands just went right through them, just right through them. And so that's how now looking back, knowing what I know about, extraordinary consciousness experience and
Now,
ethereal
did you
experience.
notice with that that there was a sensation or kind of a preliminary activity going on inside of your body that kind of brought that sense of, oh, I'm separating. I got to, find my ground, right?
Yeah, the only thing I know, at that age of 6 years old was that the idea of going with this stranger was frightening to me. Now, I
Hmm.
want to make clear there was nothing frightening about this being, this
Oh
angel.
yeah, it's like an experience of unconditional love.
Yeah, right. But as a child, it was just like, the unfamiliar. It was all so strange,
Oh,
and
shit.
so
Yeah,
I
yeah,
so
yeah,
that's why
yeah.
I was grabbing. Yeah, that's why I was
Totally
grabbing for my
hip.
book.
I had similar stuff as a kid, and I know for some reason I paid attention, and I
Mhm,
noticed the preliminary signs, and it got to where that kind of higher vibration, almost tingly sensation would happen just as my consciousness was separating from my body,
mhm,
and and then I was now the first time it happened was spooky. I was about the same age, came back from playing with kids in the neighborhood, laid on my bed, was tired, felt my body raising up, and I'm like, oh shit, am I dying? And I
mhm,
heard this voice, and it says, just relax, take a
mhm,
breath, everything will be okay.
mhm,
And
mhm.
so I took a breath and I let go and I popped out of my body. Next thing I know, I'm looking at my body from the ceiling. I was like, oh, wow. And it snapped right back into my body because it started thinking.
Right, 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 right. Yeah, yeah. Which is really, I mean, that's what happens every time we meditate.
Yeah.
We start to go into a meditative state, and then we think about being in, that, and then we snap right back. And so we're
Yeah.
constantly doing
Isn't
that.
that a paradox, right? It's like you go to the place of non-thinking and then you start thinking about non-thinking and all of a sudden you're back thinking again.
Well, I tell my students I use the Muse headband for a while. I don't know if you've ever tried it. It's a lot of fun. It reads your brain waves. It syncs what you're
Uh-huh.
doing. And anyway, when you start doing the Muse headband, when you're in the beta busy brainwave state, when you first
Hmm.
start, you have a sound and it's like a walk. It's like rain falling in a tropical rainforest. It's not jarring, but you know that you're in your beta. You're not in alpha
Right,
state. You're not in
right.
meditative state.
Well, and you've
But
got
then,
the
but then,
awareness to pay attention
but
to that sense and sound too.
because you're present. But then
Yeah.
when you start to slip into alpha state, then what happens is the rain goes away. And then if you go into a deeper theta alpha, deep meditation state, brainwave state, then birds start to chirp. And then when you hear those chirping birds, you start thinking, I'm a really good meditator. And then the rain starts to fall
Right,
again.
exactly.
But anyway, I just wanted to mention something about what you just said because this whole conversation that we've had, our parallel life paths and everything. I can't tell you how comforting and exciting and unusual it is. I mean, I think there's a lot of us out there, but we just don't talk about it a lot. But the thing that I wanted to mention was, when this intelligence said, just let go and everything will be okay. Well, what this angel did was it took me out of our we lived in the office of a Blue Star Motel, a small motel my parents owned,
Hmm.
struggling motel, and we slept in the office in case somebody came in at night. And so anyway, so this angel pulls me out of bed and it just starts flying me across our small western Kansas town, Ellis, Kansas. And so I'm flying with this angel, and we fly all the way across town, and it sits me down on this brick alleyway in between the Sunday school that my parents sent me to, a Lutheran church, and then the Lutheran church my parents went to on the other side. And it brings me down in this alleyway, and it starts teaching me how to take deep breaths. I
Hmm.
start taking these deep breaths, and then somehow it's explaining to this 6-year-old boy that I am that if when you let go of the breath, let everything let go. Let go, let your mind, your heart, everything that you are, just let go as you exhale. And what happened was I started like lifting up off the bricks, like
Hmm.
flying,
Hmm.
and it was so cool. And uh,
Because you
and
have no
then and
attachment to the planet at that point.
what'd you say?
You have no attachments to the
Right,
planet at that
exactly.
point.
Everything, everything.
Yeah.
You just started lifting up. And then what happened was I got really adept at it. And I started doing these huge loop-de-loops up towards the moon and back down through this alleyway. And then this angel looked like it was satisfied, like it had
Hmm.
done its job. And then the next thing, I woke up in the morning and I was so excited. I grabbed my lunch bag and I'm running down the alley to get to school because I want to teach all the kids how to fly.
Right.
And so I'm running down the alley and I take that big breath like the angel taught me, jump up in the air and come splat down in a mud puddle. and and so I didn't get to teach the kids how to
Yeah,
fly.
well, you
Then
had another body with you at that point, right?
yeah, exactly. But then 40 years later, yeah, 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 well, not 40 years later, actually about 20, 30 years later, that's when I started teaching meditation. And then that's when I started, sharing these
Hmm.
skills about letting go and breathing and floating and drifting and all that. So it all unfolded, like with your story that you shared
Oh,
with me.
it's interesting. And like you said, I think there's many of us that have had these experiences. We
Yes.
just don't know who to talk to, where to find, the.
We interviewed we did a whole interview series. Our YouTube channel's at Global Transformation Project,
Hmm.
and we interviewed the leading scientists in the world on consciousness and brain science, and that's what became the second edition of the Gospel of Science. And
Awesome.
we had a professor from the University of Virginia Division of Perceptual Studies Department, Dr. Kim Penberthy, and she said that there was a study where they taught people how to meditate. And what happened was over the course of this study, over the weeks of meditation, over 50% of the new meditators started reporting extraordinary consciousness experiences. So this is something that people are able to access through meditation. Uh,
Hmm.
and so that's really exciting.
Whatever, we've called it meditation for years because that's been easiest and it's just stilling the mind and breathing.
It's
And
alpha brainwaves,
yeah.
when you get down to the.
And one of the things that in college that I learned, because I was probably like you, experimenting with a lot of different realms and substances. And
It was the time of man.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And it opened a lot of doors and also brought some very intense experiences. So one early morning, I guess it was, I was a bit anxious and I wasn't paranoid, but I was just feeling really, tense. And all of a sudden, and you know how you shift consciousness and become obsessed on where your attention's at in
Mhm.
those states. I
Right.
had my fingertips together, didn't realize it. And I felt my fingertips or felt my heartbeat in my fingertips. And as I focused on that, my whole body started pulsing and I was aware of my breath and everything distraught, anxious, all of those sensations disappeared within a matter of moments.
Mhm.
And I've used that technique since then. I mean, that was 18 years old, right? But that's a simple
Yeah.
practice. And we all have various rituals that we do and paths that we find that enable us to achieve that state within ourselves
Mhm.
that promote this greater sense of consciousness, connectivity, and flow of events and paying attention to people that come into our lives as a result. Now, with that statement, how did you, when you were moving through your teens and early 20s, and what did you, being aware of the breath and having that kind of consciousness going into it, I'm sure that it brought other levels of awareness. What did you find in that process? And in looking back, were you cognizant of the shifts that it provided for you and the greater connectivity in your life as a result?
To be honest with you, it's like I really couldn't comprehend what was going on most of my life until I looked back at it.
Sure.
Uh, and I had so many side roads.
But yeah, to understand it, you look back. To
Yeah,
live, you're in the present going forward, right?
yeah, right. And it's just that thing, looking back, it was just, going into source consciousness, and then the rocks would rise when you were walking,
Hmm.
for you to step on. But I had a lot of detours. I got when I was a teenager, I went to high school in Texas, and we did a lot of like not crack, but oh, they called it crank. It was amphetamines,
Yeah,
and I ended up getting
cocaine
hepatitis
and
C.
amphetamine mix, right? Something like that, I think.
Yeah, we just shot up amphetamines, and I ended up getting hepatitis C from dirty needles. And so it was, my whole life has been kind of this this wild ride of, ecstasy, and then, really low peaks and stuff. But the point that where everything really started to change in a huge way consciously was in my 20s. And I've from talking to scientists and psychologists about these things, I've come to realize that it's really common for people to have huge experiences when they've gone through life experiences that just kind of shattered everything because then there
Right.
was
Yeah, it
nothing
destroys your
underneath.
belief system. It's like, here's the unknown that's being present, and you don't know what's going to happen, and you
Mhm.
completely release to something
And
because
I
you
think
don't know
that
what to
has to,
do.
yeah, and I think that has, I don't think it has, I don't think it has to be tragedy. I think meditation is designed to do
Absolutely,
it
I agree
for us,
with you.
but it's like we have to let go of our old paradigm. It's like Zen koans, what's the sound of one hand clapping? Well, there's no answer. And so our life, so what happened with me was,
Unless you're really dexterous, right?
yeah, that's right. But what happened with me was, in my mid 20s, my mother passed away. And the night before she died, she wrote a note. She had a premonition that she was going to die. And she wrote a note and she said, I wish I could go back and learn these meditation things that you were trying to teach me. And then she passed away that next day. And then a few months later, then my father passed away, and I was only like in my early mid 20s. And then
That's rough.
within a
I've
few
lost both my adoptive parents, and I don't care how old you are, when it happens, it's tough.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, you're just rudderless
Yeah,
at first.
yeah, for a short
And
time.
but
Yeah, absolutely.
and then on the other end of it, then a few months later, my youngest son went into a coma, and then he was in the hospital for about a month, and then he passed away. And so it just leveled me,
Wow,
and
what
and
a
and I did exactly what you did. I got down on my knees by my bed, and I hadn't done that since I was a little kid. And it wasn't like I was praying to God because I didn't know what I believed in, and I still have a very nebulous view of the universe and consciousness and everything. So it's not dogmatic or anything, but
well,
I
it's
but
hard to
I
be
just
concrete with the formless, right?
right, exactly. But I got down on my knees and I said, look, I said, I do not understand, after what I'd just gone through, I said, I don't know why we're here. I'm not getting it. And I said, I need to know why are we here? Why are we here? And this presence came to me at 3 o'clock in the morning. I remember because what I did after that was I laid down, meditated in bed, and I fell asleep. Well, 3 o'clock in the morning, all of a sudden I'm sitting straight up on the end of my bed. And it was probably my ethereal body again, but I didn't look back, to see my
Hmm.
physical body. And so I'm sitting there, and this presence, it did just what I wanted to find out, which is why are we here? And it said very simply, it said, I am about to show you what life could be like. And it touched me right in the center of my brain, and like the pineal gland. And
Right.
this light just expanded. And then it touched me right in the center of the heart. And this light just expanded and it filled the room. And I could see the ceiling rushing at me. And I could see the slats in our attic. And then I was looking down at our house in California. And California was getting smaller and the earth was getting smaller. And I had this huge cosmic experience, very similar to what you're talking about earlier off camera, and I just had this cosmic awareness of being connected to everything, and it was all love, and it was all elegant. It was like all the chaos that we see. There's this elegance that's unfolding within,
Right.
throughout, and
Isn't that
around it, and all this stuff led me through 40 years to create the second edition of the Gospel of Science. And you were mentioning earlier how we have these experiences but we don't talk about them because it's weird and stuff. Well, what I
Mhm.
did was I put together 40 years of collected science, and when you go through this science, what it brings home to you in a very visceral way, because I've listened to my own audible version of second edition of Gospel Science twice in the last few weeks. What
Hmm.
it does is it pushes into your cellular structure that these experiences are not weird. They're the
Yeah.
opposite of weird.
Well, I would ask this, does it push or does it allow emergence?
You mean the initial experience of it? Or,
Yeah,
oh, you
because
mean the book
because
or,
it's all within
or the
you,
science? Yeah, what the
right?
science, one of the really powerful things all this collected science does is it just gives you this visceral intellectual knowing that these experiences that we have when we have them are just the most normal things. There's nothing abnormal about these cosmic experiences.
Right.
In fact,
Right.
they're the most real things that we'll ever have. And so when the world out there makes us feel stupid or defective or unusual because we have these experiences, if you listen to this 21 hours of science, you will have a visceral knowing that these experiences are very real and very powerful and very important for all of us to become, conscious of and unashamed of, and also unashamed of talking to other people about. And as I've gotten immersed in all this and these scientists and everything, I have these kind of conversations with people constantly. I try to get a
Sure.
sauna in every day at the gym, and I have these cosmic experience conversations with everyday people on an everyday basis.
Yeah,
And
I tend to do
we,
that any place I go. My
yeah,
wife is
yeah.
like,
But
"Wow,
we
you
start
you
to
just
realize when we
you
do
don't waste
that,
any time, do you?" Like,
well,
why?
when we do that, we start to realize that this is happening on a massive scale. It's
Yeah,
just never going to get reported on television because television focuses on fear-based information.
usually. And even with that, there's still for the seeker, there's things that can be found. In 1989, I was introduced to William Swigard's work, and you may or may not be familiar with it. He came up with two different processes. One's called the multi-level awareness technique. The other is the multi-plane awareness technique.
Uh-huh.
And I'll speak to the MPA right now. It's a process that takes the facilitated process that takes the experiencer through 9 planes of consciousness, integrates your body on each of those planes, and then gives you an opportunity to see there's more, and then you come back and you drop them off. Well, when I went through the experience, we got to the outskirts and the facilitator says, "Okay, I want you to get ready to come back." And I'm like, "Okay, I'm ready." And whoop, I'm back. I open my eyes up, turn to look at him, and he says, "Uh-oh." I'm like, "What?" You said to get ready to come back. I was ready. I came back. He said, "Well, you're supposed to drop the bodies off where you got them." And I flippantly said, "Oh, well." Right? Because I had the experience, but I didn't realize the fullness of it. I had a party in my room for 2 weeks till I figured it out. I had a psychic stop by and spent the night, woke up middle of the night, says, "My God, how could you sleep in here? There's got to be at least a dozen different beings in this room." And it wasn't till then that I finally is like, "Oh, I grok it now." Right? So now the cool thing is 20 years later, I'm getting ready for an interview with Dr. Jeffrey Mishlove, and I'm going through his old shows, and I run into Vernon Neppi's show about the triadic dimensional distinction vortical paradigm. And he and Edward Close put together this theory of everything paper in 2010, published it,
That
and it
sounds familiar.
basically says that consciousness, space, and time are tethered across what? 9 planes of consciousness or 9 dimensions.
I think
And
string
eliminate
theory.
others just says the human bandwidth is these 9 levels. Well, the consistency there is just phenomenal, right?
Yeah.
You've got this experience, and now you've got some science to back it up. So I brought that up to edify what you were saying is science backing up all of these things that the ancients have known
Yeah.
and a few of us have found along the way. Now that we've had COVID and the self-examination and the time to repair and relax and look inside more, many of us have come out to find each other because we realize something has just happened that's promoted us to do so.
Hmm.
Hence the conversation we're having.
Right. Right.
Now, how
Yeah. Yeah.
does this, how did you bring this into when you started teaching? What were the kinds of things that you noticed, the feedback you were getting, the new insights that you gained
Hmm.
through, because there's a teach learn process, right? We teach what we
Hmm.
need to know a lot of times because there's deeper levels of it.
Hmm.
What did you find out in that process?
Well, for me, it was a long journey because when I first started teaching, perhaps because of my mother's note, uh, I what happened was I started teaching in hospital settings.
Hmm.
And my first hospital setting was at Shawnee Mission Medical Center, and a whole bunch of doctors enrolled in it because it was, this kind of stuff was really unusual back then.
Oh, no
This was
doubt.
like 30 years ago. And so they were just curious. And so I had a surgeon, a pharmacologist, emergency room physician, different doctors in there. And it was blowing their minds because they were getting off of hypertension meds and chronic pain meds just after like 2 months of,
Sure.
meditation, Tai Chi, and Qigong practice. And so then what these doctors did was they started handing me medical research. And so they're giving me all this medical research and it's validating the benefits they're getting. And then I started realizing this is happening with mind body teachers all over the planet.
Yeah.
There, and then what I started to realize over time, I was studied sociology at the university. I started to realize this could save the world trillions of dollars. And so then
Mhm.
that eventually led me to a meditation that showed me that if I got a massive group of people doing Tai Chi, that the TV stations would show up and I'd be able to use the microphone to educate people about this. And then that became World Tai Chi Day and spread to 80 countries. And we got like 1 billion readers, viewers to read news on mind body science. So I was approaching it from that physical health and
Mhm.
economic savings approach. But then after the pandemic, see, I used to have arguments. I don't know if you've ever heard of Dr. Effie Chow, but she was a huge force in the Tai Chi and Qigong world. She was the founder of the World Congress on Qigong. And she and I would have telephone arguments because she'd say, Bill, you can't just focus on the physical aspects of this. She said there's like a whole spiritual dynamic of this that's really important as well. And I
Mhm.
had I had kind of pushed away that part of it because at that time we were trying to get accepted by Western medical science.
Oh, right. And
And
you had to be
and
very
you couldn't
materialistic and data driven.
exactly. And also
Yeah.
also what I began to realize, and you'll see it in the second edition of the Gospel of Science, is there's a huge prejudice against uh, scientists that go into consciousness realms. Their careers get ruined on a regular basis. It's like a whole issue. And so like a lot of Tai Chi and Qigong and mind body people, I just completely moved away from that whole consciousness, spiritual aspect of this because I could see that people needed the healing benefits and we needed the
Mhm.
economic savings from it. So that's where all my focus went. But then after the pandemic, it was like you were talking about, it's like I had a lot of time to go within and to, really reconnect with this higher thing. And I realized that we're actually going into a time where it's a much bigger deal than just the physical health aspects of mind.
Absolutely.
Because
And all the
people,
calendars.
well, what's happening is we're going through what the Mayan prophets called the quickening. And
Yeah.
the quickening is
I was just going to go there. Pick it
I'm
up and
trying to find
go.
the
Run with
optimum
it.
place here. Here, I'll just do this. And the quickening, the Mayan prophets called this time we're in the quickening, where everything is going to go into hyper speed. And it's so disorienting for people. And we all experienced it during the pandemic and the lockdowns, and still, post-pandemic stress disorders is something that we're all dealing with. And I realized that people really needed to understand the depth of consciousness because fear is what's holding us back.
Sure.
And that's what these things are designed to do, is to help us let go and know that everything's going to be okay. And then that allows space for this consciousness to come unfolding through us
Hmm.
that is profound and world altering and incredibly exciting. But again, you're not going to hear about all this good news on mainstream media because it's fear
For
based.
now,
There's
because, like you were saying, we're in this quickening stage, and part of that quickening is that because of the focus and the rise of vibration of those who are practicing, it brings those things which are discordant to the surface for
right.
review,
Yep.
which
Mm.
is what's happening and has brought us to the brink of what's going on right now.
Yeah, Buddha said that the road to enlightenment is paved with disillusion.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So it's all part of the elegant plan.
And we're designed to, as a planetary civilization, I can't really speak for others.
Mhm.
However, it makes sense that there's a progression of both the physical and spiritual aspects that are symbiotic, but yet not always recognized as so. Because we've done the best we could with the information we've had because of who's been telling us and our want to believe in others who were supposedly experts.
Well, I think one of the things that's happening is our false idols are melting.
Hmm.
Because it's like we thought, okay, we can put our faith in this person or that institution or this media source or whatever. And what we're coming to terms with is that all those things are sort of dancing illusions. And the only real thing is when you connect with that core source. And so I think that is part of the awakening too. We're losing our false idols that we
Right. Well, and we're
put our
also,
faith into.
to some degree, stepping away from mainstream media. I mean, these things have done a lot for the ability to do that because the kids
Yeah.
are sitting around and they're texting each other and they're not on the media. They're scrolling through YouTube. YouTube's got its, pros and cons. However, it's not as propagandized as major
Mhm.
media and newspapers and things like that. So
It's
there,
not as influenced by huge monetary interests. It's more
oh
innocent.
yeah, all the media channels are owned, I think last time I heard, 8 companies.
I think it's down to six.
It could be.
Yeah.
There's always the M&As, mergers and acquisitions.
Mhm.
If you're big enough, you want to swallow everybody else up.
Yeah.
That's the alpha mind and alpha chassis, according to Dudley Lynch.
Mhm.
He wrote a book called the Mother of All Minds back in the late 90s. And he says that the new beta mind, and still in the alpha chassis, but the beta mind, the alpha mind steeped in competition. The beta mind understands oneness.
Mhm.
Now, how we play that out, we have to first understand that in that oneness, there's a tremendous amount of diversity
Mhm.
and that
Mhm.
it's all okay.
Yeah. And beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yet, we've been programmed that anything that's different or appears different, we stiff arm it
Yeah.
immediately.
See, I think all that has come to a peak crescendo, and I think
Yeah.
it's coming to a crescendo so that we would all get sick of it and move on to something much more healthy, which is realizing the beauty of the diversity of the oneness, like you say.
The sense being made common.
Yeah. Actually, the very first experience that I had in my 20s,
Hmm.
what happened was the next morning, that night when I got up, I was trying to I was like, oh my God, what did I just experience, after this expansion experience?
Oh,
And I
sure.
didn't know what I was going to do. My wife was snoozing away, she didn't have the experience with me.
Oh,
And, uh,
yeah.
and I was standing in my kitchen in my underwear thinking, okay, what am I going to do all night long? And I looked at the counter and there was a pen and paper. And this voice that had told me I'm about to show you what life could be like, it said, when I noticed the pen and paper, it said, write. And so I sat down, and the very first thing I wrote was a poem. And I had never written poems before. I'd never been a writer. If some teacher forced me to write a poem, I'd write, the cat sat on the mat kind of thing.
Sure. Right,
And
right,
but anyway, I sat down, and this pen just took off. And this wasn't my poem. This poem was about this intelligence. And
right.
this intelligence, I knew it just wasn't working with me. It was like working on a planetary scale, and I was
Yeah.
just part of it.
In the
But anyway,
metaphysical
but
realms or
anyway,
New Age realms, we called that automatic writing.
exactly. That's what I realize now in retrospect. And it
Yeah.
took me a lot of years to read this because it was hard for me to read it because people would have thought I was writing about me, and I
Oh,
wasn't.
sure.
And
And
it
it's
took
so
me,
strange when it happens because there's another part of you that seems to take over,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And you're just
So
watching it happen. I had the same thing happen to me after my
so
experience. I'd met my guide, his name's Zephyr, and I was meditating one day, listening to albums, and I heard pick up a pen and paper and write.
there you go.
And so I do. And by the time I've done, I got 3 pages of what looks like Sanskrit. I couldn't read, I had no idea what it said, right? So I took it around to the professors on the campus, and they're like, it's all bullshit, right? And it's like, no, there's something more here. And I had a friend who, I didn't grow up in a metaphysical home. I
Right.
had a friend who did, and he was aware of automatic writing and could do it. And so I approached him. I said, hey, is it possible we can get together and maybe figure out what this means or where it came from? And
Uh-huh.
he said, sure. So we did. He started writing the same thing.
Wow.
I hadn't shown him,
Yeah.
right? Because I wanted to withhold that in order to test the truth. He
Yep.
starts
I'm the
writing the
same
same
way.
stuff. I said, dude, I don't understand what it means to you. He says, no. I said, but the same stuff I wrote. I said, is it possible that you could communicate with your guide, Herschel was his name, and get him to translate? I said, I don't know. Never tried it before. Let's see. And so, he reconnected, and sure enough, he translated. And so Zephyr turned out, which was who we were questioning, and this is who was writing.
Uh-huh.
He was from what's now the southwestern US over 20,000 years ago,
Oh, okay.
which prompted me to want to go to the Southwest. I was in Indiana at the time, Ball State University, Muncie. And it was like, okay, I got to go to the desert Southwest. And 4 years later, I was in Phoenix.
Wow. Fast. That's amazing how, see, that's the stones rising,
Yeah,
Yeah. Well, let me tell you this poem that
sure. Yeah,
yeah.
I want to
So
hear this. This is
no, no,
awesome.
all this is great. It was just totally, it's a very exciting conversation. But anyway, I ended up calling it, I didn't have a title for it, but finally when I decided to start reading it publicly, I called it The Messenger, so that I could explain to people, I'm not the
Sure.
messenger.
Yeah.
I may be like a
No,
fractal.
because I want to kill you.
Yeah, I may be a fractal. I may be a fractal drop of water. Yeah, I think it was Oscar Wilde that said, "If you're going to tell truth, make sure it's funny, or else they'll kill you."
Exactly.
Yeah. But anyway, but I call it The Messenger, and this is the poem. And so keep in mind, I wasn't a poet. This was
Mhm.
wild stuff to me when I wrote this. Anyway, it goes like this: I have come to heal this world, to show men what they already know, to make the obvious apparent, to drive common sense home until the anvil of consciousness shatters beneath the hammer of that sense. And from that shattered anvil, a simple, steely truth shall be forged that when one of us suffers, so do we all.
Wow.
And I've
That's
never written a
powerful.
poem. I mean, I've written books of poems.
Yeah.
I'm actually an award-winning poet, but
Now, right?
I've never written a poem that came anywhere close to this little
Oh,
poem.
sure. And it's the essence of loving and being loved.
Yeah, yeah. And that's what the gospel of science gets into, is the science showing that compassion and love are the foundation of the universe. You see it in our DNA structure, you see it in economics, you see it in every level of society. I've taught in maximum security prisons. When you teach people how to meditate, the empathy and compassion parts of their brain gets bigger, and the
Hmm.
fear and stress parts of the brain get smaller, and their brain is able to broadcast more powerfully to the people around them when they're in states of connection and empathy
Sure.
and compassion. And it changes the whole prison. I've seen it. It happened at Folsom Prison when I was there, and
That's awesome.
they followed the data. Yeah.
There's a woman I met that trained Huna, and she was doing a workshop on measuring your aura. And I was curious. It was up in Prescott. It was a couple hours away. I thought, yeah, I'm going to go. I'm curious. And I showed up early. That's where the magic happens usually, right? So I said, tell me more what you're doing. She goes, well, basically, I just use dowsing rods, and I have people go into three different states of consciousness: past, future, and then present. And I demonstrate when the rods open as to what the size of their aura is when they're in each state. And I'm like, oh, that sounds cool. She goes, would you like to try it? I'm like, absolutely. Right. So we're in a 40-foot square room. She tells me, stand in this corner, close your eyes, focus on the past event, and just go there with everything you got. And so I did. She started at the other corner of the room, came towards me, rods open. We marked this. She had me open my eyes then. We marked the spot on the floor. And she says, okay, now I want you to go into the future, do the same thing. Did, mark the spot. Then she picks up a rock from the windowsill and puts it in my hand, says, focus on this. She barely got two steps in from the other side of the room. The past and the future opened up about 6 feet away from me. The present opened up almost, well, the hypotenuse of the 40-foot room, so 50 some odd feet. So six or seven
Wow.
times.
Well, this is really amazing because in the Gospel of Science, I have this story, and what happened was when I was in my 20s, that's when I went back to meet my wife's parents in Hong Kong. She's from Hong Kong, and so
Mm,
I had never been out of the country. Western Kansas boy, went to high school in West Texas, but anyway, small towns. And I'd never been anywhere, and I got jet lag when I got there. And I had just started learning Tai Chi and Qigong, and I was practicing a lot over the period of months before we went
hmm.
because my mother-in-law did Tai Chi when my wife was young. And so I wanted to impress her, and show her.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. That's
So
great.
I was practicing a lot, trying to learn the long form so I could do it in front of her. And so when we got to Hong Kong, I had jet lag, really horrible jet lag. And what happened was I could only sleep until about 3 o'clock in the morning, and then I'd wake up wide awake. And so fortunately, my in-laws had a garden, which is really unusual for Hong Kong. And so I was able to go out in their garden, and Hong Kong was like spreading out all the
Mm,
skyscrapers and everything. And because I had just started learning meditation, Tai Chi, and Qigong, uh, there was nothing to do. I couldn't do anything. I couldn't turn on the TV. It would wake people up, you know? And so I just went out in that garden and I was doing more meditation than I'd ever done in my life. And even since then, I'm just not a huge dedicated guy like some
Well,
types of people
there's
are.
so much fun to be had, right? Rather than
Yeah,
sitting still.
that's right. That's right. And but anyway, man, it was like intense. And this went on for like a couple of weeks. I couldn't sleep for a couple of weeks. So several hours of meditation every day. And we went down to one day we went down to catch a ferry to go over to the mainland. And so we're sitting there and it was a gray day and the ocean was gray and the sky was about the same gray. And we're sitting there having a cup of tea and we're waiting for the ferry to come in. And this lady walks by and I could see this plume of energy coming off of her head. You know, the first thing I thought about was halos,
Uh-huh.
but I could see it. And what you were talking about when you were in the present and how powerful that was, what I realized, because this went on for like half an hour until the ferry got there, and then we tried to get our tickets and got in the left brain, and it all went away.
Yeah, right, right, right.
I thought I was
Yeah,
going to be able to see it for the rest of my life because I could see it really clear for about like half an
sure.
hour. But
Well,
what I
the interesting thing
realized,
about that is those, there's moments. They're not a contiguous process.
right?
There's those fleeting moments
And
of,
some of them are just insights. It's
yeah,
just to show you something. And it showed me just what you were talking about. And that's what was so exciting about what you said was that what I realized during that 30 minutes that I was sitting there and seeing it on everybody was that the people that were in the moment, you know, it's like if they were having a conversation and really communing with the other person. Now, if they were in a tight conversation where they were in their head making a point,
right.
it was very small, very constipated light. But if they were in in an open exchange with somebody, it was real big and real bright. Or if they were just, enjoying the scenery and being in the moment, it was really big and really bright. But I remember there was some Hong Kong businessmen sitting there with their, fists wrapped around their
The
briefcase
briefcases.
handles. Yeah, and
Yeah.
they're thinking about the meeting in Kowloon that they're going to. Theirs was very small and very tight. And see, so I've never been able to see energy that way, except for that one day. But I don't.
That's all you
I,
needed to understand
right.
it, right?
That's what I needed. I needed to see just what you saw when the divination lady showed that when you're present, heart-centered consciousness, science is calling it, where you're just present and feeling, and you're not trying to figure out everything. That's when our consciousness is real powerful, and that's when it's the most healing consciousness. So it's really
Absolutely.
beautiful.
And that's when what we think was chaos, the patterns begin to shift in order, so you can see order. And this is one
Yeah.
thing that humans seem to have a challenge with. First of all, second law of thermodynamics. I had a conversation with Howard Bloom about that, and he doesn't believe it's true. I don't either, because as the universe, when you look at things in our development, it's refining order. It's not falling into chaos.
Hmm.
It's
Hmm.
not entropic. It's
Hmm.
just the reverse, right?
Hmm.
And now with the science, we're beginning to understand that yes, this could be true, but it's going to be a while before it's accepted in any kind of ubiquitous way, I'm sure.
Well, that's
However,
why I wrote the book to expedite that.
well, yeah, we're all doing stuff to, in every,
I
the
wanted to
inter
create, I wanted to create something where people that are, feeling and experiencing what we're feeling right now would be able to have a source where they'd be able, because what I did was I meticulously endnoted all this science because I knew people wouldn't believe it. And so it's all
sure,
endnoted with live links so you can go to it. But what I wanted to do is I wanted to arm people like us with all this science that took me 40 years to collect. So yeah, people can go out and find this science on their own if they want to spend 40 years digging it up.
sure.
Or they can go right to this page where I just have it all end noted. And
There's
then all
another
of us
gal
that are,
that there's a Russian, Valentina Morovna. She published a video in 2018, I believe it was. It was her dissertation where she received, or from which she received the Russian Science Academy's highest title of academician. And this dissertation in English, it was called The Global Mutation in Humanity. And she'd done a 10-year study of the genetic variances in humanity that's demonstrating our ascension.
Mhm, mhm.
So this is at a very, deep level science kind
Yeah.
of thing, which Russians are known for.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah,
And so
absolutely.
this all edifies, with that, with yours, with mine,
Well,
Paul's and Sam's and Dorothy's and Francis and,
yeah, yeah,
and all the other folks that are coming up and saying, hey, we're all saying the same thing differently, but we're all saying the same thing.
we're a building wave. And on what you were talking about was one of the things, some of the science that I got into in the book was that when we practice these mind-body practices and it shrinks the fear and stress part of the brain, it makes the empathy and compassion part of the brain larger and makes the brain more effective, more gamma wave consciousness, more creative consciousness. What science is showing is that evolution on a microbiological level is actually speeding up. And what they've found is that when we do these practices that change our DNA expression,
Hmm.
that those
Which is evidenced by Bruce Lipton's work as well.
exactly. Yes, and I quote him several times, but they call it advantageous mutations. So when we learn how to process stress on a better level through mind-body practices, or we become more creative or more empathetic, more compassionate, this gene expression that comes from these evolutionary improvements we get from going into alpha state regularly,
Hmm.
what science is showing is that these things can be inherited. They can be passed down. So it's not just the gene trait, the physical
No,
gene
it's the
trait.
combination of the bloodline
Exactly.
and the soul lineage
Or the
and the
morphic
vibratory
resonance.
state and these kinds of things. Lipton also wrote another book called Spontaneous Evolution.
Hmm.
A friend of mine, Steve Berman, was his co-author with that. Steve
Oh,
goes
beautiful.
as Swami Beyondananda in the New Age comedy realm, and he's just a wonderful individual. But it was so great to see this combination of a great mind and a New Age comedian who also has a great mind
Yeah.
come together, to have some fun in
Yeah, right.
presenting this evolutionary process we're in. And it is spontaneous.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's like
It's
there's
not
this
combustion.
it's the
That's a
elegant
good thing.
order. It's this elegant order that's just trying to expand through. And the mind body tools, what science shows is that they help us relax out of the way. So it's not like mind body is the answer. Mind body is tools to help us relax out of the way because this greater
Sure.
order it's really wanting to expand through in a huge
Now,
way right now.
in this expansion, would you agree that the indigenous philosophy of three brains becomes more um, understandable and important to know? And the three brains being the gut, the heart, and the head.
Hmm.
First brain's the gut, second brain's the heart, third brain's the head.
Hmm.
The gut being the sensory,
Hmm.
right? Because we got more neurosensors there now. We understand we got more neurosensors there than we do in the brain.
Hmm.
Gut feeling, intuition, these things have been around forever. We
Yeah.
haven't trusted them, but we keep saying, oh, trust your gut, right?
Yeah.
And then we listen to everybody and don't.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this connection vibratorially then allows us to distill and take the Taoist approach in the heart, right? Is it desirable or undesirable?
Hmm.
And then once we determine that, then our brain can actually work like it was designed to and indicate where flow might be as a choice that's available,
Right.
where it may
Yeah.
not have otherwise.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time speaking to a lot of scientists, but one of them was Dr. Roland McCratty, and he's the chief scientist for Heart Math Institute.
Yes, I'm
And
familiar with them.
yeah, so in the Gospel of Science, I talk about their research and what they found. They call it heart-centered consciousness.
Hmm.
And all this, talking to these scientists, it completely changed the way that I teach Tai Chi and Qigong and meditation. It's like I'm constantly incorporating the insights that these scientists.
Oh, isn't
And
it
so,
great to have your own practice? It's just we're constant, and this is the thing about true masters, right? They never call themselves masters because
uh-huh,
they know it's all about the practice.
yeah, yeah.
And we never fully achieve mastery, yet
I
we're called that by others. And it's
I
like,
have
what?
I had a you'll enjoy this. I had a student in one of my classes and she got mad at me for some reason. I said something that triggered something in her. And so during the break, I was talking to her And she looked at me, and after she got mad at me, and she said, "You know what?" She said, "I think you're the one that really needs this stuff." And it kind of gobsmacked me when she said that, but then, it's like I let it sink in for a second. And I looked at her and I said, "You know what?" I said, "You're absolutely right." I said, "I don't know how I could live without this stuff." And that's really true. I mean, I really don't know how I could get through the day without meditation. Yeah.
Yeah, once you find that place and the ability to be still for moments, however that's achieved,
Uh-huh.
it just changes everything. You slow down, you appreciate, you have more gratitude. Things around you actually speed up in the activity of the formation or manifestation of the work you're doing
Hmm.
because there's no disturbance, there's no constriction.
Yeah.
Less constriction. I'm not going to
Right.
say there's
Right.
no, because
Yeah.
there's
Totally.
still always this human side of us that is a skeptic.
Yeah. Well, see, that's why knowing the science really helped me with all that, because it's like it's overwhelming. It's just that nobody's talking about it. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah. But
guess
I
what? We
I I,
are.
I think about it like when I go into alpha state or when I spend more time in alpha state, it's like being in the center of the merry-go-round, and then the merry-go-round can spin like crazy, but you don't feel like puking, right?
Right.
Because you're in the center of it.
Yeah.
But if I get away from, my mind body practices, if I don't do saunas, if I don't exercise, if I don't do these things that bring me back to,
Center.
source and physical, mindfulness and presence, then I'm on the outside of the merry-go-round and I feel like throwing up a
Sure.
lot more.
Well, and Aurobindo reflects that in a statement he made that in that you've got to step into the middle of chaos in order to find your center.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Yeah,
Because you
that's beautiful.
naturally get to that place. And I guess, blessed or cursed, I've been able to do that since I was a kid. I take on huge responsibilities and large groups of people to, figure stuff out. And it's natural for me to see where the adjustments need to be made to make it all work. And
Mhm.
yet to others, it's so stressful and so confining, and all they want to do is control. Well, you can't do that.
Yes,
Right?
right.
You can do your planning and your setup and your strategies and all of that. However, once you pull the trigger for something, it's got its own energy and it's going to do whatever it will. And it's just up to you to be able to see that happening and prepare to be available as a servant leader to serve it.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I for me it's kind of like surfing.
Yeah.
It's like, you don't control the wave, and if you try to, you're going to wish you didn't.
Yep.
But if you let go, oh my, oh my. And that's what all these things are designed to do, to let go, let go, let go.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, as I mentioned before coming on, the whole cosmic consciousness condensed into form, just unaware thing, which we all are, that causes the condensation. All right. So now we've come to this really deep level of understanding the material world from an intellectual place and the control and management of it.
Mhm.
Now we're kind of like, okay, let's step back a little bit and see what else might emerge as to what we can actually do with it collectively when we're working together instead of trying to fight over resources and land and power and
The
all the kind of stuff that's
similarity
been
of our
happening.
experiences and consciousness, it's so bizarre. I feel like I'm talking to my twin brother here
Your
because
brother from another mother.
yeah, yeah, that's right. Yeah, I actually wrote a novel. I was going to call it The Awakening, but I ended up calling it 2012 The Awakening. It came out right before 2012. And
Mm,
anyway, so I'm writing this book, and the book, I had never heard of the Mayan prophecies or any of that kind of stuff. And but I got this character came into my mind named Ravi, a young Indian woman. And so I
hmm
started writing her story. And what her story became was this awareness that all of human history has been what Taoists would call yang. It's been conquest, it's been exploration,
Kali Yuga.
conquest, exploitation. So it's been exploration, conquest, exploitation. That's the masculine yang approach to the
Yeah.
world.
Same thing
But
is
now,
stated in the Kali Yuga in the Hindu tradition too.
yeah, I think you'll see it reflected, throughout the
Well,
fractal
every calendar.
society. But what the concept of the novel was that now we're starting to enter this feminine age, this yin age, where when we go to the cupboard, we don't stick a flag in the shelf and go, this is ours. What we do is we're becoming more homemakers. And so we look at the larders in the kitchen, the cabinets, and we observe the contents. And then we start to figure out which things we're going to use to nurture the whole household, which is in this case, the whole planet Earth. And so when I took it to my editor after I'd written it, she started talking to me about all these Mayan prophecies. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And she goes, the Mayan, the 2012. I said, no, what do you mean? And I had set the novel in the year 2012. So I started writing it a couple years before. And she
Sure.
goes, oh my God. She goes, this is your book is
You didn't, you didn't
Mayan.
even know it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And she explained to me, and then I started researching. And they said that what happened on December 21st, 2012 is, the alignment of the, center of the Milky Way galaxy and all that stuff. But what they called it was the opening of the birth canal of the cosmic mother.
Yep.
And my whole premise was that we're going into this yin feminine mode where we're going to be recognizing the possibilities and the value of the household instead of the conquest that we've done. Now, all that had to happen. All that yang stuff had to happen
Oh
to
yeah.
get the world to where it is. But now it's time for
Yeah,
something.
it's not about dragging the past with us because there's no carry-ons.
Yeah.
What it's about is harvesting it, learning from it, applying it today in order to make the future better. And then we have those ancillary things that enter in because we've made that shift.
Mhm.
It's surprising, you brought my encounter. I knew Jose Arguelles.
Oh,
He was a personal friend. I met him in 97. I was producing an event here in Phoenix called the Prophets Conference. He was one of the speakers, so was Dr. Edgar Mitchell. And
oh,
Edgar had an interesting story.
noetic sciences.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Oh man, what a sweetheart. But Jose, we can get into that, but for Jose, he and Lloydine, his wife, were just hilarious, fun-loving, super intelligent people. And they came in early, so I'd spent a week with them. We had all kinds of conversations about the calendar and all the work that he had done and what it was all about. And it was interesting that I was working for an aerospace industry in 1986. I was responsible for $7 million a month in shipments, 800 part numbers of commercial spares.
Uh-huh.
And on my way to work on the 16th of, let's see, convergence was 16th and 17th, right? So I was on my way to work on the 15th. It was a Friday, and the person on the radio, the DJ, started talking about the harmonic convergence, and my gut started to quiver like crazy. And I'm like, what the hell's going on here? Right? And I'm like, oh. And so I get to work, I call the station and I find out what's going on. They say, well, this is happening. There's information at a bookstore. There's a copy of an interview with Jose Arguelles that they made copies of to make available to the public. And then there's Crystal Castle up in Sedona that has more information. And so I called my wife, made arrangements to go camping that weekend because she wasn't really into this stuff. And we had 4 kids. And so we ended up at Dairy Springs Campground, which was across the freeway from Sedona. And one of the things that Jose in his article said that people would notice is this rotating feathered serpent medicine wheel above the gathering places. So middle of the night, I get woken up by my guy. They have me do some things, and I'm in this whole other altered state. And at one point, I'm looking up into the sky when I was asking if God made us, then who made God? Here's the rotating feathered serpent medicine wheel. Pop! That's my answer. I'm like, oh, I realize as much as I know, I still can't comprehend it. So, but to have that whole experience and then meet
Yeah.
Jose and have the
You know,
experience with him. And then in 2001, I'm in Chile, in Santiago, at a Day Out of Time festival. And I run into his South American coordinator that I'd met in Phoenix during the event in
wow.
97. And he says, hey, Jose just channeled this work. It's in Spanish. The woman I was staying with spoke fluent Spanish. She was Chilean. Russian descent, though. And so we read through that in a coffee shop, and it was a conversation between Lucifer and Memnosis. So Lucifer we know about. Memnosis was his divine consort, right?
Yeah.
And they're arguing with each other, and she's trying to get him just to slow down and stop and turn and enjoy his creation. So here, the story in the Bible, is that Lucifer was, the light bearer. right?
uh-huh,
He was the first one to condense into form. We don't understand what that means,
uh-huh,
but we blame him for it.
uh-huh, uh-huh. Uh, well, you mentioned, the image of uh, the wheel,
Rotating feathered
the
serpent medicine
medicine
wheel.
wheel.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I ended up teaching Tai Chi at Haskell Indian Nations University in Lawrence, Kansas years
Mm.
ago. And I learned so much from that. I was teaching, kids from reservations mostly how to do Tai Chi and meditation and stuff. But I learned so much from the instructors there because one of the guys that I talked to, we hit it off because I taught Tai Chi in prisons and he had done a lot of work in prisons too. And but anyway, he was very knowledgeable about his tribe's traditions.
Hmm.
And so it's really rare to find somebody that really stays in tune with all
Hasn't
that.
let it go.
Yeah, and so he told me what the medicine wheel was about, and I actually write about it in the second edition of the Gospel. Uh, the He said the four quadrants represent the four original peoples of the planet, and so you
Hmm.
have white, black, yellow, and red. And so
Right.
white is northern, western, black is southern, red is indigenous, and yellow is eastern. And he
Hmm.
said the eastern people, the gift that they bring to the planet is a deep awareness of the inner world. And all you got to do is look at Tai Chi, Qigong, and yoga.
Yeah, yeah.
And now the North and West, they said that their contribution was an intense curiosity, and that's true. I mean, they spread out all over. They wanted to find out about everything. It didn't always turn out good for the people that they've discovered, but that's a whole other.
Right.
And then the Southern was the awareness of the emotional power of humanity. And all the great music that we listen to today, that's all influenced by African music.
Hmm.
And then like Martin Luther King, when you heard him speak, it wasn't the intellectual. Oh yeah, the intellectual words were profound, but it was that resonance, it was
Right.
that heart resonance that came through with his voice. It was so powerful. And then the indigenous people, what they brought to the planet was a deep awareness of our connection with the physical world. And we all know that the modern environmental movement came out of Native American philosophy.
Hmm.
And he said that what will complete the circle is when all four quadrants of the original people of humanity recognize the value of the others as equal to their own. And that really resonated with me because my whole life was spent reconciling Western scientific investigation with Eastern mysticism and
Sure.
consciousness studies,
Well, like
and
you
how
said,
and how they were validating each other. And through that validation, it was making it spin through society much faster.
yep. And that I call it rippling through the thoughtmosphere.
Yeah, beautiful.
Right. And so, and it's rippling so much that you went out of focus for a moment as we went into that ether space for just an instant. I don't know if that's it's a good enough opportunity to spin it that way, right? It's, you mentioned the indigenous people, Hopi in particular, I found there was a rich in talking about the medicine wheel, the four directions, and even the swastika,
Mhm,
right? The ancient symbol, misused
mhm.
and flipped. So let's flip it back. I had another one of my early guests for One World. His name is Man Woman. Was his um, purpose was to write that understanding of the swastika. Well,
Yeah, I
the
was
Hopis
shocked.
had
I
a
was shocked when I went to China and saw the swastikas. I didn't know about that at the
oh,
time. Yeah, I was
it's the ancient
young.
sun symbol worship or oldest symbol on the planet, prob or close to it anyway. So one direction is used by the 12 major tribes or major clans. The other direction is used by the 12 minor clans. Now, on another level, I'd met Dan Winter years ago, who worked with Heart Math originally and went off on his own. He had an animation of two lines of force that were just beginning to spin, which is what creates manifestation or the condensation or the expansion, right? It's all about spin, depending on the direction. Well, one direction condenses, the other direction expands. He had this animation, and he was showing the two lines of force, did not see that as they started to move, the first thing it did was create a swastika.
Mm,
And so I mentioned that to him. And then the next newsletter was all about the swastika, right?
mhm,
And that was in 2000. So these kinds of things that, as you know, with each heartbeat, you're spinning in with it, and then as it releases, you spin out. It goes with the auric field, the electromagnetic torus that's around us. All of these things are integrated in so many different dimensional capacities that we're just now beginning to develop the not just the science is already there to understand its mechanisms. We're developing the technology that can measure it.
yeah. Yeah. The thing that pops to mind for me when you talk about that is quantum entanglement. Because,
Yes,
as one turns one way, the other one turns you know what I mean? At the same time. Because you were talking about the swastikas too.
symbiosis.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And we as physically incarnate beings have a symbiosis with creation that we're unaware of yet.
One of the things that I get into in the Gospel of Science is I discovered that when we go into alpha state, that's about 7-8 hertz,
Hmm.
and the background vibration of the planet Earth is 7.83 hertz, I believe. And
Something
so,
like that.
so
Yeah.
when we go into deep meditative state, alpha theta state, we're vibrating at the same vibratory rate of the planet Earth. When we do the Om chant, Om,
Hmm.
that's 432 hertz. That's the background vibration of the universe. I mean, these people were touching into some heavy duty science back then.
Well,
You know
yeah,
what I mean?
and where did they learn that?
I'm
There's
sure they
another
felt
story.
it.
We're about out of time, but I want to just mention there's another story about that, and I'll see if I can make it brief. So originally there was a race of people that were probably um, type 2, Kardashev scale, right? Using the solar energy and stuff to move around and could travel between planets. Well, they built the pyramids here to send the electromagnetic energy back because we're iron core. They were sending the electromagnetic energy back to their planet. The math was off, and they ended up destroying the planet instead. There was a type 3 civilization that was observing this and saw it happening, so they got ahead of it. They created an escape pod basically for those of that planet that got what we have, right, or beginning to understand, right, and that we're not tied into the constraints of dominance and command and control structures. And so they put them in this escape pod and brought them here. It's our moon. They have been there's one of the things that Edgar told me that he asked me not to share until after he was dead, is that on the way down to the moon, they were shadowed, spiraled around basically by this metallic silver cylinder all the way. He said, I couldn't tell the exact size of it, couldn't tell if it was piloted on board or from the planet. It definitely wasn't from Earth. Now,
Mm-hmm.
that was 1997. About
Mm-hmm.
2013, I heard a story I was involved with the ufology crowd for a while. I heard a story of Buzz and Neil also seeing the same cylinders standing upright on a platform just beyond the dark side of the moon.
Mm-hmm.
So these have been there, they've been watching, they've been helping. This interference that we've been having
Yeah.
because of the programming we've got doesn't allow us to be quiet enough to hear or have the conversations that are available through those means that we don't understand yet. Their preference for communication is telepathy.
Yeah, well, I think going into alpha state, I think that's, that I mean, it's not like I'm going to alpha state and I have a telephone conversation with somebody
Oh,
and
no, no, no. It's
but when I go into alpha state, I'm open to
you're available
receiving,
to it if
like
it's
somebody
there.
pops into my head, Bill, why don't you get 200 people to do Tai Chi together and try to get all the TV stations covered up, and then it'll spread all over the planet, and you'll get 1 billion people exposed to mine. You know what I mean? It wasn't like that, but it was just like, oh, here's an idea. This is going to do something. You know what I mean? Like that. And
There's
yeah,
those
I
things. There's
have you
other
followed Stephen
conversations that
Greer's?
are available.
Have you followed Stephen Greer's work?
I know him personally, and Oh gosh. Well, you can tell by my response, I'm reluctant to say anything. He's done great work with the whistleblower videos. The
Right.
CE5 work, I think, was although it's good, it allowed people to reframe and be able to potentially communicate, but he seemed way too interested in his self and promotion of himself than the technique and using it.
Yeah, that
You know,
could be, but I think the service that he's providing the planet right now is not to live in fear of, it's like that's a real central core of when he talks.
sure.
Is,
Well, Stephen was also
let's,
part of that event in '97, and
yeah.
he has a very strong ego that
Well, that's
is
that's
necessary
cool.
to do the kind of,
That's that's cool. I mean,
well,
some of the coolest people on the planet have big egos,
well, that's what I'm saying. I didn't
I don't
mean
think he
that
would have
was a
been able to. I
deterrent.
don't think he would have been able to do what he did without that ego because he would have been beaten into
That was the
pulverized.
point I was going to
Yeah.
make, is
Yeah.
even though it was uncomfortable to me, it wasn't my style,
Yeah.
and I didn't need to be around it. I did what I could do to set him up to do his thing,
Oh, good.
and he did it with, I the work's okay.
Yeah.
We just don't always jive with each other, and that's okay too,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. What drew me to him was, the big focus of the Gospel of Science is decimating the illusion that we live in a fearful, miserable world that's spinning and, going to hell in a handbasket.
Right.
Because when you look at the data and you look at the science, people are beautiful. The planet is vastly less violent than it's ever been before in human history. Violent crime rates in the United States and many countries around the world are plummeting. And when you look at the science on how meditation actually can dramatically reduce the violent crime rate
Mhm.
in a city when you get a small percentage of meditators and all this put together, it's a really beautiful planet. People are beautiful and it's evolving, but we're not hearing about any of that. We're hearing a fearful thing. And so when I
Sure.
saw Stephen Greer's Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, I was really magnetized to it because a big thrust of it was,
Oh, his productions have been
let's not
good.
be hysterical and
Absolutely.
fearful about this universe that we live in because, I mean, if there were our visitors, which I mean, it looks like there are. I mean, even the CNN's reporting on it. Uh,
Well, there was a congressional
if they have,
hearing just a few weeks ago
yeah,
that we're
but
talking about,
but but on the
what's
fear
going on
thing,
here.
if it's like if they have the technology to travel light years, if they had ill intentions, we wouldn't be here anymore.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
so
And
let's just
we don't get
not be
that. There's all
terrified about this.
these, wow, they're malevolent.
Yeah,
We're being
right.
controlled by a reptilian in a
Yeah.
cage in some cave, right? You hear that kind of crap. And it's just like, oh man, that's just so ridiculous. It doesn't make any sense.
I think fear is our
Now,
biggest challenge right now. Fear. If
I
the
wanted to
more we
ask you
can
about
reduce
another
fear,
gentleman.
yeah.
I agree. There's another gentleman, though, that took Stephen's work and is doing a much better job with it. His name's Costa Macraeus, and he has a website called etletstalk.org.
Oh, that sounds
He
beautiful.
organizes thousands of people around the globe monthly to do CE5 events.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I haven't done one yet, but I plan to.
I haven't needed it. I've honestly, I've
Well,
been a contactee since
I
I was a
really,
kid.
it just seems really intriguing to me, to have that connection. I have a niece that actually had an ET experience. She lives on a farm in Western Kansas, and I know it's true. I mean, she's a human
I've had them
being.
since I was a kid. I've been on ships. I've had conversations. I've had them show up in my room. I would dare say that they know me and we interact often in this overall play that we're involved with because they're very much involved with it too.
Yeah, sometimes I really think that probably a lot of, most of us are, have, it's like we're part of something huge that is lifting this planet to a new paradigm. And we're working with a cosmic intelligence, and that can take the it can have many faces and many forms. Did you ever see
Mhm.
that Whitley Strieber movie about his encounters?
Communion. I know Whitley too.
Yeah, there was oh, I would love to meet him. But there was a beautiful scene right at the end of that movie where him and his wife are in the art museum. And he's trying to understand what is this, what's happening. And she just goes, and his wife just goes, because she's come to terms with it, through the course of the movie. They go
Hmm.
through a lot of problems.
Well, Anne's not here any longer, but
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. But the character in the movie, she's talking to him and she says, look at it this way. It's just one of the many faces of God. And I thought that was so beautiful. And it was shot in an art museum. And
hmm.
yeah, it's a beautiful scene. Yeah.
Yeah, I met Whitley here at the UFO Congress in at Fort McDowell Indian Reservation, and they have
Oh, that would have
yearly.
been cool.
Yeah,
Yeah, I thought that was an important book. Yeah.
absolutely. And movie too. It,
Yeah.
it
Oh,
brought
gorgeous.
out things,
Christopher Walken,
and he's
perfect.
continued with um, in one of his lectures there. He said, this is about it's not about the contact and things of that nature. Sure, that's part of it, and some of it's kind
Mhm.
of fearful, but it's about our evolution of consciousness.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yep. I think we're here at a pivotal point in human history. And I think we're part of a movement that most of us will never meet each other, but we're all connecting.
Yeah,
The science backs all this up. Global consciousness, there's absolutely a global consciousness. We're
it's
all
the
connected.
non-local aspect of reality,
Yeah.
right? There's the non-linear and the non-local. We don't consider our conversation right now is non-local,
Hmm.
right? We're in
Yeah.
two vastly different physical locations, and
Yeah.
yet here we are.
Yeah. It gives us a model. Really, the internet gives us a model to understand how consciousness works.
Yep. There's a AI program. One of my early guests, had talked about an AI. He was involved with early AI. He developed a program in college that he was in finance and computer sciences, and their project was to develop a financial model. His
Hmm.
outperformed the Fed. And so he got multiple job offers and went in different directions. But he had some early involvement in developing AI. Several years later, in his other job, he reads a newspaper article in the New York Times, of all places. And the article basically says and uses this word, there was an AI program that escaped Sandia Labs.
Hmm.
Now, anybody who's familiar with Sandia Labs, that's the CIA software development lab and surveillance and all that kind of stuff. Well, this AI escaped. Well, where'd
Hmm.
it go? It leaves
Hmm.
no trace. How can you find it? Well, it's out there. What's it programmed to do? Help us. What might another non-human race do with it? Communicate through it with us. Do you ever find that you're surfing the web, you haven't put in any keywords, you've thought about something, but you never have touched a key or written it down or anything like that online? Then all of a sudden, there's a link that shows up on your page with a phrase that keys you into that information.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, how does that happen? That's not algorithmic.
Well, I mean,
Or is it? Is it
well,
an assumption? Is it a
but you,
predictive kind
but
of thing that the AI says, oh, yeah, you're going this direction. We're going to put this in front of you?
yeah, but like pre-computer, as I was going through the course of 40 years of research on science of consciousness,
Hmm.
there were many instances where I don't know, for some reason I'd just pick up a magazine, start flipping through it. Boom, there'd be an article there that would be exactly what I was trying to comprehend, or a book, pull it off the
That's
shelf,
another
put it
form
up
of
to
how it
just the
works.
right page.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And
Not
so,
the AI, but that's the integrated system that operates through attention, which is the question,
mhm.
intention, finding the answer, and the interactions which follow it.
Yeah, and being open to the possibility of it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it's really cool.
See,
So,
that was one of the reasons that I realized now that I wrote the second edition of the Gospel of Science was because what I realized, because I'd been doing mind body practices for 40 years, but after I sat down and put all the science together, and I had to, be in it for, several years to create the
Oh,
book,
yeah,
what happened
yeah.
was I started my mind body practice and my abilities. Like right now, I go to the basketball gym, and I was horrible at basketball in school. But since talking to all these scientists and really pouring myself into mind body practice, I shoot at an NBA level. And it just blows my mind. I feel like Harry Potter. And it was all because this science pounded into my head the potential of my consciousness is so much more huge and vast. And I think it is really important for people to have access to this awareness right now,
It
because
just
when we
occurred to
recognize
me.
our power, we get diminished. We get diminished by the old paradigm, and we need to have a validation. And so that's really why I hope people will, spread this gospel of science, because we really need to get rid of the fear and tap into our power and know that it's true, not just kind of wonder whether it's true and maybe think it's true, but look at this science, feel it in our body, and know that we are incredibly powerful. I think it's so important at this time in history.
Which brings about trust. That's fearlessness.
And that's why I'd asked you, are you willing to die for this?
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, and I didn't get asked that specific question, but I've answered it the same way as you many, many times.
Oh, no doubt. I think we
Yeah.
always do. Once we have that initial, it's okay.
Well, I think it was uh, it might have been Alan Watts, but he said after we have cosmic experiences, one real common thing is we're no longer afraid of death because we know that there's not really any death. Yeah, and in fact, it's pretty beautiful, really. In a
Absolutely.
way, I'm kind of looking forward to it. I don't want to rush it, but
Well, there's
there's
too
not
much to do.
anything that
So
I
so
fear.
much fun to have in these bodies, and that's the whole, you know, destiny of, oh, for lack of a better word, creators inhabiting their creation.
Uh-huh.
And that's the next step that we're taking as we integrate with our own
Well,
global family and our multidimensional, extraterrestrial families that are waiting for us to step up, right? And they're all that, just like, come on, pretty
yeah.
please.
Well, I'm
Here's
looking.
here's a little tasty tidbit. Here's something else. Here.
I'm looking forward to that meeting. But what it draws it reminds me of one other aspect of the science that was so exciting, and that is that when you look at the physical science, in the heart-centered consciousness, and also science is calling it gratitude consciousness, and it's when
Yep.
we're present, like we're talking about being present, and when we're really enjoying the experience, and then that's when your energy gets really big. What you start to realize when you look at the physical health science is that when we go into that gratitude consciousness, and that's what yoga and Tai Chi and Qigong and these kind of mindfulness practices are designed to do, is to just go inside and really enjoy the sensation of the body being loosened and massaged, be really present and enjoy it. And what the science shows us is that the universe, it loves it when we enjoy, it loves it when we play in this life. And it rewards us. And you saw it with the energy expansion, that the divination person was showing. And I
Yep.
saw it, on that bench in Hong Kong, with the energy coming off people that were present, that were celebrating the moment. And so the universe is playful and celebratory, and that's what all this science and the gospel of science shows. And I think it's just so important for people to spread
So
this
imagine
so
what
that we get
happens.
over this drudgery kind of
Yeah.
way of looking
Yeah.
at existence, because we're creating our future. That's what the science shows. They did a 20-year study. They studied people, thousands of people for 20 years. The biggest indicator of their future health and well-being was their vision of their future health and well-being. And the media gives people a really dismal picture of what our possibilities are for humanity, and the science doesn't reflect that. But they're not talking about this kind of science in
Not
mainstream.
yet. Not yet. It's coming. So
Well,
speaking of
that's what
coming,
I'm trying to do.
we're
I'm trying
coming
to
up
help.
on our
I'm looking
closing
for
moments.
allies like you to help me bring this science that it's already here. It's not coming. It's right here. I
Well,
spent
it's
40
all a
years putting it together.
collaboration of sharing each other's work and being cognizant of the unintentional silos that we've created by doing our own work. And now we're, as you mentioned earlier, we're looking for each other, we're finding each other, we're learning how
Yeah.
to collaborate better and more effectively. And it's just an amazing process. I'm seeing it with Live and Let Live, which is the peace movement that I'm operations director for, and with Planetary Citizens, where I've been able to take the co-creation wheel out of Spiral Dynamics and explode it into the different areas and show things individuals can do, organizations can do, who the pioneers are. So it takes that science and puts it into human form of
Yeah.
what's actually happening so that people can support that and maybe even develop more conversations about minimizing these silos that have happened because we've been focused doing our own work and
Yeah,
now it's time to
I think
share.
it had to happen. It was kind of like
Yeah,
it's like we were kind of monks. We had to go into into our
our
hermit
hermit
cave
stage.
to do what we did. And now
Yep.
we're on that other thing. But yeah, the one of the things that I'm always bringing home to people too is just realize that what the science shows is that every time we go into coherent consciousness, every time we go into that coherent alpha state, however we can get there, uh, it can that's when our consciousness most powerfully affects the whole planet. That's what Dr. Nelson, the Global Consciousness Project out of Dr. Nelson out of Princeton University. That's what
Hmm.
all their data showed. When we go into that connection, compassion, healing kind of consciousness, alpha state,
Sure.
that's when we're the most powerful. So when we're in states of fear or anger or whatever, our consciousness is not affecting the world as much as when we're in states of connection and compassion.
No,
And
because the size of
he
our
said it
aura, for
makes
one
perfect
thing,
sense.
if
Dr.
you have
Nelson, he
six
said, if you
feet
think about it, it makes
compared
perfect
to,
sense.
100-foot diameter, right? So when you're in that gratitude place and your aura is 100 feet in diameter and you're out in public, that subtle energy that you carry will affect others around you.
Yeah.
And you can actually change the energy in the room when you practice.
Without trying at all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you just have to be in that. Now that's where the practice is, being in that spot in a group full of people. I've been there, done that. I've seen it, witnessed it. Others have experienced it. So we know it to be true. And you have that experience. It's the direct experience of it that builds the trust level.
Yeah, the
Uh,
efficacy.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, speaking of, we're, oh my gosh, we've been talking quite a while, Bill. This has
This has
been
been extraordinary.
absolutely, absolutely extraordinary. And I thank you for that. What kind
Thank you.
of um, advice can you give for everyday living for people to help tune them in?
Yeah, I know this is going to sound self-serving, but it's not. I've given my whole life away. This isn't about me. In fact, I'll tell you what. If anybody out there wants to get the Audible version of the Gospel of Science, I can gift it to you. It costs me a couple bucks. I'm willing to do that because we need to break this spell as fast as we can
That's a
that
very
everything is
generous.
dismal because the science doesn't back it up, and immerse ourselves in a visceral knowing that every time we go into alpha state, we are part of a global evolution that is spreading around this planet very quickly. And our knowing it unlocks the possibility for it to happen. So anybody out there who can't afford to get this Audible book, email Bill Douglas at worldtaichiday.org and just put something in the subject line about please gift Audible Gospel of Science.
I'll have that in the
I will gift
description
it to
too.
you because if you hear these hours of this validation of your power, the connection to humanity, the power of compassion, and how there's a mind body revolution that's changing the planet right now so that we have a hopeful view of the future. It's important enough for me to get it out there to actually spend a couple of bucks to gift it to people. So,
Sure.
I mean, I'm
And
not
the
rich.
graciousness
You
to
know,
do so.
if
And
thousands of people ask me to do it, I won't be able to do it. But if a handful of people ask me to do it, I'll be able to do it.
sure. Well, You know, it's usually only a handful, right? Or has been. We'll see it as the momentum continues. We'll see it expand a bit more, and our work will have fulfillment.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we're all stepping on those rocks, and
Yep. Yep.
we don't know where we'll be
Absolutely.
5 years from now.
Yeah. Well, Bill, thank you so much for your time, your energy, this amazing conversation, apocalyptic chat, really, for many folks that weren't aware of the science that now are. And I so appreciate that. And
Yeah,
you,
thank you for all the work you're doing. Yeah, this is so beautiful, so synonymous. We're really, really moving on the same track here.
and I love it. Thank you. Namaste in La Catch. Thanks for sticking with us for this episode of One World in a New World. I'm Zen Benefiel, your host, and thank you to William Douglas, and I will see you next time.